The ocean was too still that night. It reflected the sky like black glass, swallowing every sound. Every breath the Titanic moved through that silence like a cathedral of light, a monument to human arrogance and divine blindness. They said it was unsinkable, a word that mocked the sea itself, but some of the men who built it whispered otherwise. They spoke of an unease that lingered in the steel, a sound in the hull during construction that echoed like a heartbeat when no one was near and before it ever touched the water. 3 workers had already died, their names removed quietly from the official record when the ship left Southampton. It carried more than passengers, more than dreams of luxury and power. It carried secrets sealed inside locked cargo, unmarked crates escorted by men who never appeared on the manifest, men who didn't speak to anyone, didn't eat with the others, and disappeared before the first iceberg. Warning was sent. Witnesses remembered strange orders from above. The ship's route adjusted by degrees so small no one would notice. The wireless operators told to ignore certain transmissions. The captain seen staring at a sealed envelope before locking himself in his cabin for hours. When he emerged, his face looked pale, older, like a man who had seen something that had broken his certainty. The iceberg, they say, was chance, but there are reports, buried in maritime archives, that claim 2 bright lights were seen hovering near the horizon minutes before impact. Some survivors said they thought they saw another vessel, black and silent, watching them from the distance, not a rescue ship, an observer when the collision came. It was almost gentle at first, a shudder, then a groan deep inside the metal, as if the ship itself knew below decks. A guard found one of the sealed crates cracked open inside, not gold, not documents, something else wrapped in linen and carved with ancient symbols older than any language known to man. The Titanic didn't just sink, it was taken. Asterisk. When the ship began its descent into the freezing Atlantic, the water didn't just flood compartments, it touched secrets that were never meant to see light. Down in the cargo hold, amid trunks of silverware and fine china, were 3 unmarked containers bound in iron and sealed with wax symbols. No one claimed ownership, no manifest recorded their contents, but the men who loaded them were armed, and none of them ever spoke again after the voyage began. A steward later told investigators he'd been ordered to keep passengers away from hold 3. He described a faint hum, like a vibration in the air, rising from beneath the floor. At night, when the engines were quiet, he swore he could hear voices, soft rhythmic chanting that stopped whenever anyone entered. The official inquiry dismissed it as stress, but the logbook from the cargo foreman vanished before testimony began. Decades later, a diver working the wreck found one of those crates. He didn't open it immediately. He surfaced in a panic, shaking, refusing to explain what he'd seen. 3 days later, he disappeared from his ship without leaving a note. All that remained in his cabin was a torn scrap of waterproof cloth with a single hieroglyph, drawn in black ink, the Eye of Ra. Some historians connect those containers to an excavation in Egypt. Just months before the Titanic sailed, a team funded by European bankers had uncovered an underground chamber beneath the Temple of Dentora where they found relics linked to energy rituals, devices said to channel life force into matter. Most of that team died within a year of returning home. Their notes were bought and locked away by private collectors, tied to the White Star Line's investors. What if the Titanic's real mission wasn't a luxury voyage at all? What if those artifacts were being transported to America for study under new government contracts, experiments in frequency, resonance, and control, the kind of knowledge that could shift power from religion to science, from belief to manipulation? When the iceberg struck, the impact may have done more than tear metal. It may have shattered the containment around whatever lay sleeping inside those crates, and in the hours that followed, the sea began to whisper names that no human tongue should know. Asterisk. History says over 2,000 souls boarded the Titanic, but records don't agree on who they all were. Even before the voyage began, passenger lists were rewritten 3 times. Entire names vanished between Southampton and Cherbourg. No explanation was ever given. Those who investigated later said the discrepancies were clerical errors, but the truth hides in who didn't board. 3 of the world's wealthiest men, J.P. Morgan, Henry Clay Frick, and George Whittier, had lavish suites reserved. All 3 cancelled at the last minute, giving different excuses, yet they shared the same inner circle. They were tied to the American banking families shaping the Federal Reserve Act, an economic weapon that would be born the following year. Among the passengers who did sail were their most vocal opponents, men who believed a private central bank would enslave nations through debt. When the ship went down, so did their voices. Newspapers called it coincidence, but correspondence discovered decades later tells another story. One letter, stamped April 9, 1912, warned a prominent investor not to sail. It read simply, "Delay your trip. The vessel will never reach port. You will not be alone in this." No signature, no trace of the sender. There are whispers that certain European elites wanted the Titanic's journey to end before it began. A floating gala of influence, carrying documents, agreements, and people capable of altering the global financial order, and within its cargo the relics unearthed in Egypt, said to resonate at frequencies matching the Great Pyramid's inner chambers. Technology lost to time, capable of harnessing human emotion itself. Was the Titanic a weapon disguised as a wonder, a ship meant to deliver ancient power into modern hands, or was it a ritual of elimination, cloaked in tragedy, designed to erase those who stood against the coming system? Survivors spoke of seeing strange men on deck in the hours before the collision, men in officer uniforms no one recognized. When questioned later, the crew lists showed no record of them. Witnesses said they vanished after the lights went out, as if they had never existed. The official story ends with an iceberg. But power rarely moves on ice. It moves through intention, through sacrifice, through events dressed as accidents. And in that frozen night, something far older than industry or greed may have claimed its price. Asterisk: in museum archives there exists a sketch labeled only "cargo" for to be a sapphire-colored gem, shaped like an eye, carved with concentric rings that look more engineered than sculpted. No record explains who catalogued it, or why its ink signature was later erased, but those who have studied the sketch describe a sense of unease, as if the drawing itself were aware of being watched. The myth of the Blue Eye of Ra begins in the sands of Dendera. Excavators in 1910 uncovered a sealed alcove beneath collapsed stone. Inside were fragments of quartz and copper that pulsed faintly when touched by sunlight. 2 men on the team fell ill within days, claiming they heard a high ringing tone that followed them even in sleep. Their journals, pages filled with geometric calculations, disappeared before reaching Cairo months later. Investors quietly financed the transfer of certain artifacts from Alexandria to England. Under diplomatic seal, 3 crates vanished in transit, then reappeared listed as machinery parts on the Titanic's loading schedule. The code beside them, RF, matches an abbreviation used by an early British research fund studying electromagnetic resonance. Coincidence or camouflage? Witnesses in Southampton remembered a woman in black standing near the gangway, holding a small wrapped object against her chest. She never boarded, yet her name, E. Ramses, appears in pencil on the provisional passenger list. No photo, no ticket record, no address after the disaster. Investigators could not trace her. Some survivors later described seeing flashes of deep blue light from the forward cargo deck minutes after impact. At first, they thought it was electrical sparks. Others swore the glow came from the water itself, rising upward instead of sinking down. Scientists call it bioluminescence. Sailors call it a warning. The gem, if it truly existed, was never recovered. Its supposed energy source remains unverified, but photographs of the wreck show a pattern scorched into a bulkhead that matches the eye's design exactly, down to the inner spiral, a brand burned into steel 2 miles below the Atlantic. Still faintly visible after more than a century. Some say the eye was simply art, coincidence etched by pressure and salt. Others feel that, when the lights flicker during dives, the shape glows for a heartbeat, just long enough to remind them that the past isn't done watching. Radio was still a young miracle in 1912, barely a decade old, fragile, half-understood. Operators called it the talking lightning, a force that could carry a human voice across invisible air. Yet aboard the Titanic, something else began answering back. The ship's Marconi room glowed with a steady hum from twin transmitters, their coils bright as small suns. Hours before the collision, the junior operator Harold Bride logged an entry he later tried to erase. It read, "Unknown frequency, rhythmic, repeating every 23 seconds. He thought it was an echo from the Cape Ray station, until he realized the pattern formed coordinates, numbers that didn't exist on any chart. Passengers nearby complained of headaches, nosebleeds, a feeling of static inside their skulls. Bride told the senior operator to shut down for recalibration, but an order came from the bridge: maintain transmission. No explanation, only the captain's signature. Survivors recalled strange behavior that evening: crewmen pausing mid-step, staring at nothing, their movements briefly synchronized as though following a silent metronome. The band below deck played a waltz that no one had requested, each note off by the same fractional delay. When asked later, the violinist said he'd been hearing a signal. After the ship went down, rescue teams kept receiving fragments on the open channel for nearly 6 hours. Faint pulses, spelling a single word in Morse, seeing the origin triangulated miles south of the wreck site, far beyond the ship's last known position. Analysts called it interference from ice reflection, but decades later, naval researchers scanning that same frequency during sonar tests heard the same rhythm every 23 seconds. Tesla once wrote that certain electromagnetic tones could trigger memory in water itself, like grooves in a record. If the Titanic's hull carried more than passengers, if it carried devices meant to harness vibration, then maybe the sea still replays the last moments in endless loop. Stop. Modern divers report their equipment malfunctioning near hold. 3 recorders capture a whisper that repeats in multiple languages, layered over static, as though the ocean itself is transmitting its confession. No one has decoded the message, but the pattern remains perfect and mathematical, patient. And sometimes, when the radio hiss grows quiet, you can almost hear a heartbeat inside it. Asterisk: for more than 70 years, The wreck of the Titanic lay untouched, a ghost frozen beneath miles of pressure and silence. Then in 1985, when the first submersible cameras reached its resting place, they found something the world never saw on television. Footage was edited before release. Entire sequence. One diver later confessed that between the collapsed decks, behind a wall of twisted steel, they discovered a safe the size of a coffin. It bore no company markings, no serial number, just a triangular engraving that none of them could identify. The team catalogued the coordinates and prepared to surface the vault, but before they could, a military vessel appeared on radar unannounced, demanding immediate communication. Within hours, recovery rights shifted from the research consortium to a private contractor with government clearance. Every diver signed a new confidentiality agreement. Footage stopped when the safe was finally lifted. It was transported under armed guard to an undisclosed facility in the North Atlantic. Officially, the container held historical documents and personal effects. Unofficially, the manifest changed 3 times in a single day. No one involved in that recovery ever spoke publicly again. One of the technicians, interviewed off record years later, said he remembered the weight distribution being wrong too balanced, as if the object inside generated its own counterforce. He described a low vibration even when the machinery was still. The sound made his chest tighten. Weeks after the vault's removal, several researchers from that same expedition resigned without explanation. 2 suffered rapid hearing loss. 1 developed a recurring fever that doctors could not trace. The expedition's chief engineer filed for asylum in another country, claiming he was being followed by agents who didn't belong to any nation. Rumors spread of what the safe truly contained, a crystalline device, perhaps one of the lost artifacts marked RF from the original cargo manifest. Others claimed it was simply a ledger, proof of transactions that linked governments, corporations, and banks across continents even before the Federal Reserve existed. Something capable of rewriting the narrative of economic history itself. Whatever it was, it vanished into classified archives. And when later expeditions returned to the wreck, the imprint where the safe had rested was still warm on sonar, though the surrounding steel measured below freezing, as if the object had refused to die with the ship. Asterisk. When the expedition ended, the world celebrated discovery, but behind the newsreels and press conferences, the crew who had touched the Titanic's wreck began quietly vanishing from the public record. Within 6 months, 2 divers resigned from marine work completely. 1 moved inland, bought a cabin in the mountains and refused interviews. Another stopped answering mail. His family filed a missing person report that was later withdrawn without explanation. The official story said he was alive and choosing privacy. No proof was ever shown. The project's lead met. Dr. Alden Bram wrote a single article hinting that the hull damage didn't match an iceberg impact. He mentioned microscopic traces of energy distortion metal grains, aligned in a pattern similar to exposure from high-frequency resonance. Before the paper could publish, it was pulled. Weeks later, his laboratory caught fire overnight. He survived, but his research was gone, and he refused to speak about the Titanic again. Others tried to leak fragments. 1 engineer mailed copies of sonar images to a journalist in Boston. The envelope arrived empty, resealed by tape marked security inspection. He died of heart failure 2 weeks later, aged 39. Another diver recorded a private interview describing a low droning hum that followed me even on land. That tape was seized during a customs search and never returned. The few who stayed in the field described the same pattern: phones clicking with phantom interference, unmarked vehicles parked near their homes, career funding evaporating without reason. They called it coincidence. But every coincidence led to silence. A memo surfaced years later through a Freedom of Information request. It referenced psychological containment protocols for personnel exposed to deep-sea anomalies. No department header, no signatures, just a typewritten date, 1986. The wording suggested something more than simple secrecy, an attempt to erase collective memory itself. If the Titanic carried relics that could alter how energy, matter, and consciousness interact, then understanding them would mean controlling them. And control has never belonged to the discoverers. It belongs to those who can bury the evidence while pretending it never existed. The wreck still rests in darkness, but the people who touched it paid the same price the passengers once did, vanishing into the same cold silence that guards whatever truth lies sealed beneath the Atlantic. Asterisk. For years, every image the public saw of the Titanic's grave came from 1 carefully edited reel, grainy metal corridors, drifting silt silence. Then, in 2003, a box of forgotten canisters surfaced in a university archive labeled Unprocessed Deep-Sea Footage, 1987. No sender, no paperwork. Inside were 13 reels of 16mm film coated in ocean residue. Restoration technicians expected corrosion and static, yet the frames were pristine, almost too clear. The first minutes showed what everyone recognized: rusted railings, porcelain plates, the slow snowfall of sediment. But halfway through reel 4, a shadow crossed the lens. At first it looked like a diver's glove, until the shape drifted upward, folding against the current instead of with it. When magnified, it revealed geometric symmetry, angles and arcs that seemed mechanical. The operator's log at that time recorded no other submersible in the area. On reel 6, a brief reflection appeared on a cabin door, a bright pulse that flared 3 times, evenly spaced, then vanished. Engineers reviewing the footage found the interval matched to the same 23-second signal once heard through the wireless room's transmitter. Static from the film's magnetic soundtrack carried a faint rhythmic clicking, identical to Morse code for the word "seen." After 3 weeks of analysis, the university transferred custody to a maritime agency for verification. Within a month, every digital copy was wiped from its servers. The technician who performed the transfer left a handwritten note in the film case before it disappeared. It said only, "Not an illusion." Pressure did not distort this. Something reflected that light. Researchers who viewed the reels before seizure remember a final scene: the camera descending into hold 3, pausing on a jagged hole in the wall. Through it glimmered something smooth and metallic, untouched by rust. The diver's hand reached forward. Then the film ended mid. No follow-up footage has ever surfaced. Official statements claim the reels were test exposures, but the catalog numbers correspond to no known camera on that expedition, and the container manufacturer went out of business 10 years earlier. Whatever those frames captured, they suggest the Titanic is not entirely still. Somewhere in that deep pressure, light continues to move, answering signals we no longer send. In 1992, nearly 80 years after the Titanic sank, a private court in London received a sealed deposition delivered by hand, stamped property of the Widener estate. It was not meant for public eyes. Inside were 64 pages, written in trembling ink by the grandson of one of the ship's wealthiest passengers, a man who had chosen not to sail at the last moment. The grandson claimed he had discovered a set of letters, bound in oilcloth and hidden inside a false compartment of an old family trunk. The letters were addressed to a banker in New York, dated just 3 days before the Titanic's departure. They spoke of cargo tied to a covenant older than empires, and warned that men of profit have turned relics of faith into instruments of debt. Attached was a list 12 names, all investors connected to the Federal Reserve proposal that would soon rewrite global finance. 9 of those men boarded the Titanic, none returned. The grandson's testimony described a chilling discovery, a note pinned to one of the letters that read, "The sacrifice will seal the system." He believed the sinking was not a random accident of nature, but a ritual of power, an act designed to erase opposition and unify control over the financial pulse of the modern world. The more he studied, the more he claimed to find telegrams, coded phrases, and a shipping ledger that did not match the official records. It showed a separate manifest, one never declared 2 customs for an item listed as atonement freight, RF designation. When he tried to publish his findings, the court intervened, citing national economic security. The materials were seized, and the man placed under a non-disclosure order that would outlive him. After his death, the documents were locked away in the British National Archives under seal until 2085, yet one photocopy escaped, smuggled to a journalist who vanished while investigating its contents. In her notes she wrote that the letterhead carried an emblem unseen in modern banking, a single eye, encircled by waves, engraved above the initials RF. They said it stood for Royal Freight, but the man who testified called it something else. He said it meant Ra's Fund, a name whispered in Masonic circles long before the Titanic ever set sail. When researchers finally obtained fragments of the Titanic's cargo records through maritime insurance archives, they expected simple listings: coal, mailbags, machinery, fine linens, wines. But one set of entries stood apart, not for what they said, but for how they were written. A column of repeating letters, slashed through with diagonal ink marks, and initials that didn't match any shipping company on record. It began with RFS-13A, then RFS-14B, a sequential chain that abruptly stopped at 13. Even though the Titanic's hold capacity allowed for over 50 containers, experts assumed clerical shorthand, until a linguist from Oxford compared the spacing and discovered something chilling. The intervals matched the spacing of hieroglyphic phrases found in the Book of the Dead. Each cluster translated to one word: awakening, offering, descent. A team of independent historians later learned that similar markings had appeared on cargo manifests aboard the RMS Olympic and the Britannic, the Titanic's sister ships. But those ships never carried any goods registered as RF. It was as if the letters themselves were placeholders, identifiers for something coded, perhaps never meant to be read by human eyes at all. In 1989, a deep-sea retrieval mission led by an unnamed consortium claimed to find a bronze plate within the Titanic's mailroom debris. Its surface bore engravings identical to those strange initials RF, encircled by a serpent devouring its own tail. Radiocarbon dating placed the alloy's origin not in the 1900s, but around 1200 BCE. The team's report was suppressed, and every diver was bound by silence under corporate secrecy clauses. Those who spoke out described a pattern: the way the crates were stacked, 13 in all, forming a deliberate shape seen only from above, a spiral, ending in the ship's coldest point, directly above where the hull split open the night it sank. Some believe the cargo was never meant for delivery. It was a seal, And when the iceberg tore through the steel, it was not the ship that was broken, it was whatever boundary those objects had been placed to guard. The manifest remains incomplete, but the ciphered initials appear again and again throughout financial archives, hidden beneath layers of coded transactions. Always the same letters, always RF, and always linked to people who seemed to know long before the iceberg was sighted that the Titanic would never reach New York. History remembers him only in fragments, his name appearing once on a cancelled passenger list, and again on a telegram that surfaced decades later in a museum archive. Benjamin Guggenheim, John Jacob Astor, Isidor Straus. Their names filled the Titanic's halls with power, but among them was supposed to be one more financier, Edwin Charles Harrington, a quiet investor from Boston with stakes in 3 major shipping lines. He paid in full for a first-class suite, then abruptly cancelled his voyage 2 days before departure. The official record says he fell ill, yet his bank ledgers tell another story. The day before the Titanic sailed, Harrington withdrew his holdings from an investment syndicate connected to J.P. Morgan, the very man who owned the White Star Line. That same afternoon, he sent a coded telegram to his partner, reading only, "The wave breaks tonight. Do not board. The seal must hold." No one ever heard from him again. 6 months later, a body was found in the Thames, an unidentified man, his face too damaged to recognize. In his pocket, a single silver coin engraved with the same serpentine insignia that divers later found inside the wreck. When cross-referenced with photographs, the jawline and height matched Harrington almost perfectly, but the coroner's report vanished before confirmation could be made. What makes his case more unsettling is what investigators later uncovered in his personal correspondence, a letter addressed to his daughter, dated April 8, 1912. He wrote, "The world believes in progress, but what sails on that ship is older than belief itself. Men play gods, and gods do not forgive such arrogance." The handwriting was authenticated, the ink, modern for its time, mixed with ferric salts that only bankers used to mark secret ledgers. Some theorize Harrington was not warning of an accident, but fulfilling a role, ensuring that certain people would be aboard, and others not, a final alignment before history's correction. In circles of secret finance, this act had a name: the cleansing of the table. Every man who could have opposed the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 was aboard the Titanic that night. Every man except Harrington. His final telegram, never meant to be public, ends with 6 words that still haunt researchers today. "The cold will remember their blood." In the shipyards of Belfast, where the Titanic was born, the air once rang with hammer strikes, laughter, and pride. But buried within the Harland and Wolff archives lies a document few ever saw, a blueprint that should not exist. Dated March 6, 1911, it bears the signature of the chief architect, Thomas Andrews, yet the handwriting below it belongs to someone else. A signature that reads simply, E. Blackwell Directive RF. According to shipbuilding logs, no engineer by that name ever worked on the project, but the plans he amended changed everything. In this alternate blueprint, the watertight compartment, the Titanic's most celebrated safety feature, had been subtly altered, not strengthened, but simplified. A cross-section shows missing rivet reinforcements between bulkheads 5 and 6, the exact region where the iceberg later struck. When modern metallurgists examined recovered pieces from the wreck, they discovered a strange alloy in those weakened rivets, not the high-carbon steel used elsewhere, but a cheaper, brittle mixture laced with trace elements of manganese. This wasn't a cost-cutting error, it was deliberate. Each faulty rivet had been stamped with a microscopic crest, the same serpentine emblem seen on the recovered bronze plate in Harrington's coin in 1985. A retired engineer named Malcolm Rayfield came forward, claiming he had seen the Blackwell modification firsthand. He said the directive arrived by sealed courier from London, bypassing both the White Star Line and Harland and Wolff management. Its justification read, "Required structural alteration for stability recalibration per RF code." Rayfield's testimony never reached the press. He died in what newspapers called a domestic accident. 1 week later, the anomaly does more than suggest negligence, it suggests intention. That the Titanic's flaw was not a mistake of engineering, but a key placed precisely where it would guarantee catastrophe. And once again, the mysterious initials, RF, appear like fingerprints of fate. The modified blueprint remains under restricted access at the British Maritime Museum. Curators refuse to confirm its existence, but internal catalogue logs hint at a sealed folder labeled Titanic Revision B. The B stands for Blackwell, and no record of an E. Blackwell exists before. After that single signature in 1911, the world remembers the Titanic's final distress call, CQDSOS, a desperate plea sent into the dark, answered too late. But few know there were other transmissions, faint, fragmented bursts of Morse code that official logs later dismissed as static interference. Yet deep in the archives of Marconi Wireless, a forgotten logbook holds those fragments intact. At 12:42 a.m., moments after the first iceberg impact, operator Jack Phillips tapped out an irregular pattern, 3 letters, a pause, then 2 more, RF, then silence. Minutes later, a second signal followed. This one encoded differently, a pulse sequence never used in maritime distress calls. Its spacing matched an experimental transmission protocol being tested by British intelligence at the time, meant to encrypt government messages. But the Titanic was not a military vessel. Why was that code even on board? A researcher named Dr. Andrew Kelso spent years analyzing those signals. He discovered that the pattern 3 short, 1 long, 2 short corresponded to a coordinate range far north of the Titanic's last known position, a location in the North Atlantic with no recorded ships nearby, except one. Witness testimonies mention a mysterious light on the horizon that night, a vessel seen too close for comfort, its lamps unregistered and dim. The Californian was blamed for ignoring distress rockets, but logs show its radio had been shut off hours earlier. And yet, a signal matching the Titanic's encryption was detected on that very frequency, originating from what the records call Station A11. No such station has ever been verified. Survivors in lifeboats later told of a faint rhythmic clicking over the waves, not natural, not the sea, like invisible keys still sending a message. When decoded, those patterns spelled only 2 words: it listens. The Marconi Company never released these findings, but internal memos from 1913 revealed that portions of the Titanic's wireless equipment had been removed and transferred to a government warehouse long before the wreck was officially located. Why remove parts of a destroyed radio, unless the signal was still being received, long after the ship was gone? Some say the Titanic never stopped transmitting, that deep beneath the Atlantic, something continues to answer, not to call for help, but to repeat a message no one dares translate aloud. By the time the Titanic set sail, London's financial elite were already divided. On one side, industrialists dreaming of expansion, open trade, limitless ocean commerce. On the other, men who believed control was worth more than growth. They called themselves the Consortium, though surviving correspondence refers to them by a more cryptic title, the Company of Shadows. They had no office, no public charter, and no written laws. Their existence is pieced together only through fragments, intercepted telegrams, erased bank transfers, and anonymous meeting notes found inside a burned briefcase from 1912. At the top of one memo, underlined in red ink, was a phrase: RF Initiative Asset Realignment. April. Those words appeared again in White Star Line financial statements, hidden within expense codes that corresponded to untraceable offshore payments. In plain terms, someone outside the company was funding something inside the ship the same week those transfers were made. The Titanic's insurance policy was quietly rewritten. Its liability clause changed from act of God to operational loss. The beneficiary listed was not the White Star Line, but a private bank in New York, Hamilton and Reed Trust, later exposed as a front for the very men lobbying for centralized monetary control. After the sinking, that trust received an immediate payout, $10 million in 1912 currency. Half of it vanished through a trail of shell accounts. The remainder funded the creation of a new financial body that would become, 1 year later, the Federal Reserve System. Coincidence? Maybe, but one signature binds them all. A financier named Lord Reginald Ford. He never appeared in Titanic's passenger list. He never claimed ownership in White Star Line, yet his initials, RF, are engraved into nearly every document surrounding the tragedy. He was a man who never sailed, yet somehow steered the course of history from the shore. In 1914, Fortier disappeared. His mansion outside London was found abandoned, its study stripped bare except for one object, a water-stained model of the Titanic. Pinned beneath it was a single note written in Latin: Nus in tenebris navigamus. We sail in the dark. Disasters are supposed to be random, cruel accidents of fate. But history, when seen from far enough away, starts to look like a pattern, a blueprint repeating itself with chilling precision. A British naval historian named Dr. Ellis Vaughan spent 20 years studying maritime catastrophes. He found that the Titanic's coordinates for 143N, 4,956 U, aligned almost perfectly with the position of an earlier tragedy, one erased from official memory. The 1898 sinking of a fictional ship in a novella titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. 14 years before the Titanic, a novel predicted it. Same route, same cause, same name. The ship's length, displacement, and passenger count matched within single digits. Even the time of year was identical. Most dismissed it as eerie coincidence, until Vaughan mapped the latitudes of later wrecks. The Lusitania, the Andrea Doria, the Estonia all fell along a mirrored arc crossing the same North Atlantic corridor. When plotted on a global projection, the line curved not randomly, but geometrically, forming a perfect spiral centered on one point, the wreck of the Titanic. It was as if the sea itself was marking something, returning again and again to the same invisible axis. Vaughan theorized that each disaster followed a timed cycle, roughly every 27 years. One ship of significance, carrying influential passengers, that was destroyed under unavoidable circumstances. Each event coincided with major shifts in economic control, war funding, or international banking reform. He called it the blueprint of time. When Vaughan presented his findings in 1973, His notes were confiscated by the British Admiralty under the Official Secrets Act. Within months, he was found drowned in his own bathtub. His death ruled accidental. But before he died, he mailed a copy of his charts to a friend in Montreal with a final warning. They've built a pattern in water. Every catastrophe renews their covenant. That chart remains hidden in private hands, showing one final date, an event projected for the early 21st century, somewhere in the same Atlantic corridor. When asked what he believed awaited there, Vaughan answered only, the 13th seal, the ship that will not sink, yet will never surface. Asterisk, in 1997, a private expedition known only as Operation Nereus descended into the North Atlantic. Its official mission, structural mapping of the Titanic's wreckage using advanced submersibles, its unofficial goal, quietly funded by 3 banking conglomerates, was never disclosed. Among the divers was an engineer named Daniel Reeves, a veteran of deep-sea recovery. He wasn't prone to superstition until that night. At precisely 2:17 a.m., as their submersible hovered above the Titanic's bow, Reeves noticed a flicker, not from his console, not from the floodlights, but from the wreck itself. A pulse of bluish-white light rippled along the hull, like something inside was breathing. His first instinct was mechanical discharge, maybe battery interference. But the sensors told a different story. The light wasn't electrical. It was biophotonic wavelengths more consistent with living tissue than any metallic reflection. It pulsed every 23 seconds, matching the interval of the Titanic's last recorded radio signal. The crew's internal audio logs, later leaked anonymously, captured Reeves' voice trembling. "It's responding." The sub's instruments began to fail, gyroscopes spinning, depth sensors freezing, compass needles reversing polarity, and then, through the forward viewport, something impossible appeared. A figure, or what looked like one framed in the glow, drifting between the railings, not flesh, not shadow, but outline, human-shaped, but fluid, bending with the current. When Reeves returned to the surface, he was incoherent. He claimed the light had looked back. 2 days later, he was removed from the mission, diagnosed with decompression trauma, and silenced under non-disclosure threat. The official report blamed optical illusions caused by methane hydrates, but a fragment of raw data from Nereus' black box later surfaced showing a sudden concentrated electromagnetic burst originating from the wreck center, not from above. In that 0.7-second spike, the frequency matched something that defied randomness, a perfect harmonic of 432 Hz, the ancient tuning frequency once associated with sacred geometry and resonance in Egyptian architecture. After that night, the wreck was declared a protected site, restricting further private dives. Yet satellite readings over the area occasionally detect faint anomalies, periodic flashes invisible to the human eye, repeating at that same 23-second interval. It's as if something deep below still remembers what happened, or refuses to let the world forget. In 2004, an antique collector in Geneva acquired a weathered notebook from a private estate sale. Bound in cracked black leather, its pages filled with numbers, Latin inscriptions, and faint imprints of seals long since removed. The estate had belonged to the descendants of a banker named Sir Lionel Harcourt, one of the silent financiers behind White Star Line's insurance syndicate. He was never listed among the ship's investors, but his handwriting matched the financial signatures, hidden in the company's archives. The notebook was soon dubbed the Black Ledger. At first glance, it looked like routine accounting, until someone realized the currencies didn't match any known financial system. Pound signs appeared beside hieroglyphic characters. Roman numerals were arranged not by arithmetic, but by planetary positions, and beside every entry, the same symbol, the coiled serpent, with the initials RFTHE. Ledger described transfers that could not have occurred in 1,912 amounts listed in credits or bonded tons, exchanged between entities that wouldn't exist for decades. Names like IMF, BIS, Fort Knox, Holding, dates stretched forward into the future, as if the ledger had already recorded events that had yet to happen. Harcourt's final entry was different, written in darker ink, as though pressed by a shaking hand. It read, "All debts returned to the sea. The great vessel is the vault." Beneath it, a signature, not Harcourt's own, but Lord Reginald Fortier's, the same phantom financier linked to the Titanic's coded transactions. The initials RF glimmered faintly under ultraviolet light, revealing a hidden second line, "Seal complete, awaiting resurrection." When investigators tried to trace the ledger's chain of custody, the collector's name disappeared from auction records. The artifact was purchased anonymously by a London foundation with ties to high-level banking families. 2 months later, that foundation merged into a private research group studying temporal models of financial behavior. The ledger hasn't been seen since, but fragments of its text survive, uploaded by archivists before the sale. Those fragments detail something terrifying, a 12-step formula aligning global currency resets with ritualized disasters at sea, each marked by the serpent symbol, and at the bottom of the final page, one unnumbered note: "When the 13th vessel falls, the cycle begins again." If Harcourt's ledger is real, it means the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was an offering. When the rescue ship Carpathia reached the Titanic's lifeboats at dawn, the survivors it pulled from the black water were barely coherent, shivering, blinded, half dead from exposure. Yet among the chaos, a handful of passengers behaved differently. Silent, uninjured, watching the horizon as though waiting for something else to surface. Their names rarely appear together in official records, but cross-referenced notes from crew interviews reveal 13 individuals, first-class passengers, all grouped near Lifeboat 7. They spoke little during rescue, refused medical attention, and requested immediate passage to New York without press contact. When reporters demanded interviews, they signed a joint statement declaring the sinking an unfortunate mechanical tragedy. But one line of that statement is peculiar. It repeats in the handwriting of multiple survivors, word for word, "The sea has taken what it was promised." Decades later, one of them broke the silence. A woman named Beatrice Foy, age 9, confined to a nursing home in Maine. In 1983, she told a young caretaker that the ship didn't die alone. She said there was light under the water, not fire, not flares, but something shining upward from beneath the wreck. Her words were recorded, dismissed as dementia, and locked away in a forgotten interview file. But Beatrice wasn't the only one. 4 of the 13 survivors later met in secret under the guise of a charitable trust called the Atlantic Memorial Fund. Their first act was to purchase and seal the rights to all recovered Titanic artifacts, blocking public exhibition for nearly 20 years. Their second act, never made public, was to establish an encoded foundation charter. The name on that document, Resurgence Fidelis. Once again, RF, the charter's symbol, was the same serpent ring found in every artifact connected to the disaster. In Latin, its motto read, "From the deep we remember." Some researchers now believe these survivors were more than witnesses. They were custodians, chosen, perhaps unknowingly, to ensure that what sank would remain hidden, to protect the secret buried within the wreck, or to guard the world from it. All 13 members of the fund died between 1948 and 1951. Every death officially unrelated. Their descendants maintain the trust to this day. Their archives sealed under maritime confidentiality until the year 2037. Whatever they saw that night, they carried it in silence for the rest of their lives. And somewhere beneath their calm statements and polite grief, a single truth lingered: the Titanic survivors did not escape something. They survived someone. The ocean floor around the Titanic is colder than ice. It isn't just water, it's silence made physical. Most divers say you can feel the pressure of history pressing down there, like the ship itself is still alive, guarding what remains. But in 1997, a private deep-sea expedition led by Dr. Malcolm Havers detected something that shouldn't exist. Behind a collapsed section near Boiler Room 6, sonar readings revealed an enclosed space, a chamber not recorded in any construction plans or recovered schematics. It was sealed by reinforced steel, untouched by corrosion, as if protected by time itself. When they cut through the first layer, electrical instruments began to fail, cameras flickered, communication lines went silent. One diver described hearing a low hum, not mechanical, but alive. He said it felt like standing near a giant heartbeat. Deep beneath the earth, inside the chamber, were remnants of machinery no one could identify: bronze-like coils, engraved plates filled with symbols resembling Proto-Egyptian script, and what looked like fragments of glass that pulsed faintly in the dark. But the strangest object was a black pillar, smooth as obsidian, standing perfectly upright at the room's center. It emitted no light, no sound, yet nearby metal began to vibrate on its own. One of the divers, Eric Lonsdale, reached out to touch it. His gloves sizzled instantly, his body convulsed. The footage cuts there. No record of what followed exists. The official report later claimed the dive was aborted due to atmospheric instability. Days after returning to the surface, the team disbanded. Havers himself disappeared during a flight to London. His research confiscated under maritime protection law. Only fragments of his personal log remained, recovered years later from a private storage unit in Oslo. His final entry reads, "The chamber was not built by men. It was discovered, not installed. The Titanic's builders sealed it, and someone ensured it would never be found again." No subsequent expedition has been allowed to revisit that section. The coordinates are locked under joint restriction by the UK, US, and French maritime authorities. Unofficially, divers who approach the zone report compass errors and sudden blackouts, as if the ocean itself warns them to turn back. So what was the chamber? A cargo vault, a relic container, or something far older? A structure unearthed and hidden within the Titanic's own skeleton. Some theories whisper it was part of a machine buried long before the ship was even built. A fragment of ancient technology humanity was never meant to rediscover. And the Titanic's sinking, not an accident, but a containment asterisk. In 2003, a research vessel named the Meridian was sent to study deep-sea acoustic patterns in the North Atlantic. Their mission had nothing to do with the Titanic. It was routine oceanic mapping. But what they found changed everything. While sweeping the area 400 miles off Newfoundland, their sonar began detecting rhythmic pulses, faint, structured, and repeating every 39 minutes. At first, The team assumed it was interference from submarine communication lines, until one of the technicians noticed something chilling. The source of the signal matched the Titanic's last known resting coordinates perfectly. The frequency was too deliberate to be random. It contained harmonic layers, sequences of rising and falling tones, almost like code. When converted into spectrogram form, the pattern revealed symmetry, the unmistakable outline of a geometric symbol, a circle within a triangle, intersected by a vertical line, the same mark found carved into the forbidden chamber's bronze plates. Authorities classified the data within 48 hours, but fragments of the recordings leaked through a whistleblower, a sonar engineer named Riley Cross. He claimed the signal wasn't mechanical, it was biological. "The ocean isn't echoing the Titanic," he said in an interview. "It's echoing from the Titanic." Cross was found dead 6 months later in what was ruled a carbon monoxide accident. His files vanished from the university archives the following day. Independent researchers, who later analyzed the recordings, noticed something else. When the signal was slowed down 800 times, it began to resemble a human pattern of breathing, steady, rhythmic, unnaturally sustained, as though something vast beneath the wreck was asleep or waiting. One oceanographer who reviewed the data anonymously said, "If it's a transmission, it's not a distress call, it's a response." And here's where it gets darker. The signal isn't constant. Every year on April 15th, the anniversary of the Titanic sinking, it grows stronger for precisely 6 hours before fading again, almost as if the ocean itself remembers or commemorates. Some scientists believe the signal is simply geological resonance. Others whisper it's something older, something that existed long before the ship and chose that night to awaken. And if that's true, then perhaps the Titanic wasn't just a tragedy, perhaps it was an activation. 14 years before the Titanic ever set sail, a man wrote its story. His name was Morgan Robertson, a sailor-turned-writer who in 1898 published a short novel titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The book told of a luxurious British ocean liner, the Titan, described as unsinkable, the largest vessel ever built, and built to withstand any storm. It struck an iceberg in April in the North Atlantic and sank with massive loss of life due to a shortage of lifeboats. The details are identical, down to the ship's size, speed, and even the number of propellers. At first, people dismissed it as coincidence, but the similarities go beyond the plausible. In his story, the Titan carried a secret government cargo, insured under obscure contracts tied to foreign powers. Its wealthy passengers included banking magnates and industrial leaders, the same names that appeared on the Titanic's real passenger manifest. Robertson never explained where his inspiration came from. He claimed the story came to him in a dream after waking from a vision of ice and thunder. He spoke often of impressions, moments when ideas simply arrived in his mind, whole and vivid as if dictated by something unseen. When asked if he believed in prophecy, he said, "Not prophecy, memory." After the Titanic sank in 1912, reporters swarmed him. They accused him of involvement, of foreknowledge, even of connection to the shipbuilders. He denied it all, and within 2 years he was found dead alone in a New Jersey hotel room. The cause? Heart failure. But those who saw his body described his expression as one of sheer terror, eyes wide, as though he had seen something return. Here's where the trail bends toward the forbidden. A private notebook recovered from Robertson's belongings contained sketches, not of ships, but of symbols. Among them, the same circle within triangle motif found in the sonar signal and the chamber engravings, and beside it, a single phrase written in a trembling hand. It wasn't a story, it was a warning. Researchers have long debated whether futility was mere coincidence or evidence of something stranger. The idea that information can ripple backward through time, memories of the future reaching those who can hear them. And if that's true, then Robertson wasn't predicting the Titanic. He was remembering it. History tells us the Titanic was the triumph of British engineering, a symbol of human progress, mastery, and control. But hidden within the archives of Harland and Wolff, the Belfast shipyard where it was built, lies a missing chapter, one that suggests the Titanic's creation wasn't entirely human. In 1908, before construction began, the ship's chief architect Thomas Andrews received a sealed package from White Star Line headquarters. The documents inside bore no company insignia, only the initials RF. They contained schematics unlike anything his team had seen before. Detailed designs for reinforced bulkheads, magnetic compartments, and an inner hull structure formed in perfect geometric ratios, golden ratio proportions, down to the millimeter. Engineers called it divine math. Andrews called it a pattern older than reason. According to diary fragments later found in his family's estate, Andrews wasn't the true designer. He wrote of the committee, a group of unseen investors who dictated every material, every rivet, every measurement, even the ship's compass design. No one at Harland and Wolff had ever met them. Their correspondence came through coded telegrams from London, always signed the same way: "We build what was begun. The rest you need not know." In the spring of an engineer named Michael Brannigan reportedly tried to resign after claiming that part of the ship's internal framework, a sealed section below, Cargo hold 3 did not correspond to any engineering purpose. He said it was built from an alloy not on any supply list. Weeks later, he fell from the scaffolding. The official record calls it an accident. His body was never recovered from the dock water. The deeper Andrews went into the project, the stranger it became. He wrote of the night sounds, a hum that rose through the hull like breathing metal. He said the blueprints changed when copied, that no two drafts ever matched exactly, and on the final page of his notes, a single line remains underlined twice. They said we were building a ship, we were building a vessel. After the disaster, Andrews was last seen in the first-class lounge.com, almost resigned as if he knew. Eyewitnesses said he simply stared at the clock, whispering something they couldn't hear. One survivor claimed the words were, "It had to go back." Perhaps the Titanic was never designed to conquer the sea. Perhaps it was built to return something to it. Asterisk in the mid-1970s. Deep-sea technology finally made it possible to reach the Titanic's resting place, a feat long considered impossible. But the first expedition to actually locate it wasn't the famous one from 1985. It was earlier, darker, and buried under layers of national secrecy. Declassified naval logs from both the US and UK describe an operation codenamed Project Seraph. Officially, it was a sonar mapping mission testing Cold War submarine sensors. Unofficially, it was a retrieval. In August 1974, two vessels, USS Neptune and HMS Resolute, converged silently on coordinates eerily close to the Titanic wreck site. The mission's real objective: recover a classified object of unknown origin, sealed within the ship's lower cargo compartment. Documents later revealed the object's shape: cylindrical, approximately 8 feet long, composed of material non-reactive to all known tests. The first descent was uneventful, but as they reached the debris field, their sonar screens began showing interference, rhythmic distortions matching the same pulse pattern discovered decades later in 2003. Crew described it as breathing static. Then communication with the submersible Agia 3 was lost. 17 minutes of silence. When contact was restored, the pilot, Commander Douglas Wade, sounded calm, detached, and repeated the phrase, "We found it. It's awake." That was the last transmission. The submersible was never recovered. Weeks later, the mission was declared a failure. The site marked as geologically unstable, and all records sealed under NATO Directive for 7B. But the story doesn't end there. In 1978, fishermen off the coast of Iceland reported finding a strange metallic cylinder tangled in their nets. It emitted no sound, no light, but their compasses spun wildly. Before local authorities arrived, a NATO aircraft landed nearby, confiscated the object, and ordered all crew detained for security debriefing. They were released 2 days later and warned never to speak of it. 2 of them vanished within the year. Insiders whispered that Project Seraph succeeded, that what they retrieved wasn't treasure, but technology, or worse, something sentient, stored, studied, then forgotten under decades of bureaucracy. And according to one redacted report, uncovered in 2009, whatever they brought up from the deep, it was still moving. Asterisk by the late 1990s, something strange began to happen. April 15th, the anniversary of the Titanic's sinking, was no longer just a day of remembrance. It became active. Global observatories started recording unexplained anomalies precisely aligned with that date. Magnetic field spikes across the North Atlantic, deep ocean pressure tremors without tectonic cores, and most unsettling of all, radio interference matching the same rhythmic frequency once detected beneath the wreck. The pattern wasn't random. It appeared in 13-year cycles, the same number of the Titanic's silent survivors, the same sequence embedded in sonar echoes. Every cycle grew stronger, every cycle closer to the surface. In 1999, satellite sensors detected a rising column of heat from the Titanic site, a phenomenon impossible at that depth. The next day, weather buoys in the same region recorded fluctuations in gravitational force, lasting exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes, the precise duration it took the Titanic to sink. Coincidence or repetition? When divers revisited the wreck in 2001, they found something that defied decay. A section of the hull that looked repaired. Metal that had corroded for 90 years now gleamed as though freshly forged, and on that polished surface, a faint engraving shimmered through sediment, the same serpentine symbol, identical to the one found on the artifact, and the survivors' secret charter. One of the divers later described hearing knocking inside the ship, rhythmic, deliberate, almost like Morse code. When they returned to the surface, their recording equipment was blank, every file erased. But the dive log still contained a single line typed by the sub's onboard AI. "It hears you." That night, electromagnetic surges were reported along the entire North Atlantic cable line, the same route the Titanic intended to cross. Civilian ships noted compass anomalies, while coastal transmitters in Newfoundland recorded ghost frequencies repeating a date, April 15th, and then silence again, until the next cycle. Some oceanographers now believe the wreck is not deteriorating, it's regenerating, that the ship is rebuilding itself, or being rebuilt from below. Whatever Project Seraph brought to the surface may have only been part of it, a fragment of something larger, awakening slowly through the ocean's memory. The pattern suggests that when the next cycle peaks, something will breach. Not debris, not metal, something that was buried there long before 1912, and has waited patiently for the call to rise again. They say the ocean never gives back what it takes, but the Titanic was never meant to rescue. It was meant to wait. April 15, 2025, midnight, 13 deep-sea listening stations across the North Atlantic simultaneously recorded a pulse louder, clearer, and more rhythmic than ever before. Each station heard the same pattern: 12 steady knocks, then silence, and a 13th strike that didn't fade. It echoed for 40 minutes, reverberating through the seabed like something enormous shifting in its sleep. And then, sonar screens showed movement. The Titanic, or what remains of it, wasn't still anymore. Sections of the hull that had lain dormant for over a century began changing angles, shifting, plates aligning, as if something beneath the wreck was assembling itself. Satellite heat maps showed a spreading glow beneath the Atlantic Trench, a perfect triangle of rising temperature, expanding outward from the Titanic's coordinates. At its center, readings became impossible. Sensors failed, instruments burned out, and for 3 minutes, every communication line across the region went black. When systems returned, one final transmission appeared on encrypted naval frequencies, a digital signature matching that of Project Se, the mission that vanished in 1974. But the message wasn't words, it was sound. 13 low, resonant tones, the same that had haunted divers and sonar engineers for decades. When converted into audio, analysts realized the tones formed a pattern, a voice frequency, slowed to subhuman levels. When raised to audible pitch, the sound became unmistakable. It was a word, not English. Older. Phonetic translation. Resurgence, Latin for to rise again. That night, coastal seismographs from Greenland to Portugal registered a deep, singular tremor, not tectonic, but biological in rhythm. And the next morning, thermal imagery revealed that the Titanic's wreck had moved, only by 20 meters, but enough to prove something alive was underneath it. Those who've studied the signals now believe the 13th knock is not the end, it's the call, a summoning. The 13th echo represents the completion of a cycle that began in 1912. The return of whatever force was sealed within that chamber, the thing the architects feared, the survivors served, and the ocean still guards. We were told the Titanic carried dreams of progress, but dreams are not what sink ships. They awaken what sleeps beneath them. So if one night you hear a distant sound echoing through static or surf, not thunder, not machinery, just 13 knocks, slow and hollow from somewhere deep below, don't listen for the 14th. It means the ocean has answered. And this time it isn't finished.